is Don't Kill the Birthday Girl. Thank you for joining me.
Happy to be here today.
I got a copy of your book, and I do a online radio show about food and chefs and all of that kind of stuff. So this is a topic that comes up a lot about food allergies and how it is extremely dangerous for some people. Just to go into a restaurant and order something for dinner is a very difficult and sometimes very dangerous thing to do. So I want to get some understanding about your experiences, but I also want to talk about um, your life in general. So give us an understanding about the allergy part, and then we'll talk about your life. How's that?
Okay. All right. Well, my allergies I've had since childhood, and they're severe and they're multiple. It includes everything from dairy to tree nuts to beef to shrimp to mango to cucumber. And that's true of a lot of people with food allergies. There's over 12 million Americans who've been diagnosed with it. And the difficulty is that in our personal lives, our everyday lives, food allergies vary so widely for each individual person. You can have different types of reactions, different severities. They can change over the course of a year, if not a lifetime. And so when you move that into a space of like restaurants and ordering there, it's very hard to translate that to a simple, consistent vocabulary, which is why people in the food industry struggle to know how to deal with this. They don't really know what the difference is between celiacs or wheat allergy or intolerance.
And for you as a child, how did you find out there it was such a wide range of things that you were allergic to?
Well, to be honest, I just couldn't keep anything down when I was first born, and my poor parents were doing exactly what every parent in 1980 would try to do: feed your child milk, fatten her up. And what they were giving me was, in effect, what was making me sick. And so, luckily, when a child is first born, you can't have the kind of reactions that you have as an adult, what we call anaphylaxis. It's usually wasting disease. So after my first month, I was underweight, malnourished, and it kept trying to give me the very thing making me sick. So I went in and couldn't do goat's milk, couldn't do soy milk, and that was when they realized that I clearly had this range of larger issues.
And does this also include pollen and mold and dust and all of these other things as well?
It does, and there's a really interesting phenomenon. Sometimes people will say, "Well, I feel like I have a fruit allergy, but it never really gets that bad. It's more like, itchiness around my lips." And I always tell them to make sure to think about oral allergy syndrome, which is where your body, when you eat certain fruits, mistakes the pollen and the outdoor allergens processed in the skin of the fruit as being an allergy to the fruit. So you're not actually responding to an apple, you're responding to the imitation of pollen in the skin of the apple. It's a really quirky phenomenon that more and more people are reporting.
Oh my goodness. Now, I did not know about that. That can be very tricky.
Yeah. Well, the good news is that usually once people know, they can kind of step back from the food for a while or eat it in kind of processed ways. You skin the apple or you puree it into applesauce, and they don't completely lose the food from their diet. But of course, that's something you have to talk about with your doctor and work with them.
Now, for your life, one of the things I read in your information was you never had a purse where you could not include your EpiPen, your inhaler, all of these things. So you just pretty much adapted your everyday life, and there it is.
Yes. And it has an EpiPen, inhaler, and Benadryl in it right now. So
Everywhere you go.
it's one of it's those little things actually that kind of get to me. It's not so much I've grown very adept at navigating the world with my allergies, but there's certain things that will always be somewhat inaccessible. I'll probably never be able to fully enjoy a wedding, all the steps from A to Z, taking part with everybody else, because it's just filled with food. It's wedding cake, and so it's just a tricky balance. The little moments are when you can feel a bit left out.
And that's part of the title, Don't Kill the Birthday Girl, was about people not embracing you or giving you kisses or hugs while they had the frosting on their mouths. Is that what the whole thing
Well,
was about?
I'm sure they embraced me in spirit. They just didn't embrace me literally.
Right.
I try to make this point to parents of children with food allergy. Ultimately, my goal at the end of the day was to not seem special or different. And so the irony was I would often lobby to have what I thought of as the good desserts served at my own celebrations. So I would want other people to be able to have ice cream at birthday parties, because from the movies and from my friends' parties, I thought that was what made for a good birthday party. But the flip side of having those foods present in the atmosphere was that once people had eaten them and it was on their hands and their lips, I really had to be careful about contact, because my dairy allergy in particular is that bad. I really can get
So
I
it's
still
not,
just don't like turkey.
yeah, so it's not just ingesting it, it's just contact with it.
Right, right. And, I think that a lot of people have approached some of the reactions to peanut allergies and to dairy allergies with some degree of skepticism. And I can tell you, it's real, and I wish it weren't. I wish it were neurosis. It's not. It's absolutely terrifying when it happens because you feel very helpless to protect yourself from being on the corner on a busy New York street and have the guy roasting cashews next to you and to start feeling yourself wheezing a little bit.
Oh my. Now, did I read somewhere that you were a restaurant reviewer?
Well,
Talk about living dangerously.
Well, one of the funny things. So right now, my book "Don't Kill a Birthday Girl" is a finalist in one of the Goodreads Reader's Choice categories, the awards, and it's in the category of food and cooking. So here I am with Paula Deen and Gwyneth Paltrow and Alton Brown, but it actually gets at a larger point, which is that you can be allergic to foods and still love food, be a foodie, love to eat. And actually, the way that I ended up reviewing restaurants was I was at a party and I was giving an ode to sushi because for an allergic person, sushi is a dream food in that it's very consistent, very traditionally prepared, very simple, pure ingredients. And so this boyfriend of a woman who I had that was close friends with happened to manage a local paper, and he said, "Well, why don't you write a roundup of sushi restaurants in town?" And that kind of one thing led to another.
Oh, okay. Well, that makes total sense. At first, I thought, how could she possibly even walk into some of these restaurants considering
Oh yeah.
your allergic reactions? Yeah.
I freely admit it was a short-term job. I did it. I mean, this was just freelance, but I did it for about a year, and then there was like the third time in a row that they'd asked me to review a French place or an Italian place, which talked about its, wood burning pizza oven, or where I just was like, guys, you're asking me to go to places where their favorite dish is the one I can't even touch. So,
Right. Yeah.
that's all right.
Oh well. One of the things that stood out is to me is you make it very plain that you do not expect the world to change for you.
Right.
So give us that perspective.
Well, I think it's just important to realize that even though my awareness and consciousness has to kind of focus on these allergies, I mean, people sometimes ask if my allergies have contributed to being a writer, and I think they have in that I have this acute sensitivity to what's going on around me at all times. But the flip side of that is that I can't project that and think that everybody else's world ought to revolve around the fact that I have these allergies. One of the anecdotes I talk about in the book is when my sister decided to become a vegetarian at the very young age of 11 or 12. And of course, this set off complications. My mother went from having to cook one meal for the family, one meal for me, to having to cook one meal for her and my father, one meal for the vegetarian, one meal for the meat eater who's allergic to everything. And I resented it. I really struggled. It felt like such a luxury decision. How can you just choose to not eat a whole category of food? But over time, she stood by her decision. I've lightened up, and I've realized her vegetarianism is not about my food allergies. So, yeah,
Yeah,
it's a
that's a
learning
good
process.
point. You're bringing up an excellent point where people are selective about what they eat, not because of an allergy situation, but simply for whatever reason. Could be social
Yeah.
consciousness or just or health reasons, but not
And
allergic.
the thing that's really frustrating about that, and this goes back to your point about the restaurant industry, is when it is a dietary choice, but they code it as an allergy to make it easier. So like when people go into a restaurant, or sometimes you'll see celebrities in interviews, they'll say, "Oh yes, once I realized I was allergic to pizza and chocolate," and it's always suspicious if they don't name the main foods, they name like the processed foods. Once I realized I was allergic to pizza, I dropped 20 pounds, and I hate it when I see, celebrities doing interviews like that because what happens is you go into a restaurant, you scare the goodness out of the staff by making them take care of you because you have a deadly dairy allergy. And then at the end of the night, they see you take a bite of someone's chocolate dessert, because it's
Right.
not really an allergy, it's a decision. And it trickles down and it really hurts the credibility for those of us for whom it's a life and death issue.
Now, how do you face a menu at a restaurant when you?
Scenically.
I know.
I mean, one thing I do is I make it a point. I try to identify two or three dishes that work naturally with my range of allergies. I mean, You don't pick the pistachio crusted fish and then ask the kitchen to do a good version of it when you're allergic to pistachios.
Mhm.
You have to kind of work with the menu a little bit. So I
Mhm.
don't have quite as much choice as some people. But you also learn to just embrace it from the angle of we're going to work together, not, you're going to kill me and I'm going to sue you, or my survivors will sue you. Because that's what happens then is you end up with a boiled chicken breast and a baked potato. And
Right.
honestly, I've had enough of those dinners to last a lifetime.
I can imagine. So your perspective is you learned about what you can and cannot have. You're prepared for every possible emergency there in your handy handbag,
Yep.
and you want to be treated like everyone else, basically.
Right, right. And it's parents often I get the question of parents of what do I tell my kid who's just been diagnosed? One of the quirky things about food allergies is unlike diabetes, unlike celiacs, which in many ways have similar social effects, food allergy isn't necessarily inherited. So a lot of times you have parents trying to relate to kids where the parents have no firsthand experience, and that makes it much more difficult. And the thing that I try to say to them is approach teaching them about their allergies with a message of empowerment, not fear. Don't think of the EpiPen as this, big scary needle that they have to know how to use because if they're life or death, they have to do it. Think of it as telling your child, you know what? It's difficult that you have these things, but you also have the power to treat them like any doctor would at any moment in time if you feel unsafe. And it's actually a liberating thing on the relative scale.
Good point. You are also a poetess.
Yes, I am. I'm the author of two collections, a book called Theories of Falling, which actually has a sequence called Allergy Girl in it. And my second collection is I Was the Jukebox. It came out in paperback this year from Norton.
And I have a copy of that, thank you.
Oh, wonderful.
So you decided to write Don't Kill the Birthday Girl because why?
Well, I've always trained primarily as a poet, but when I wrote those Allergy Girl poems, I sensed that there was a story that I wanted to tell related to my story that was just too big, too prosaic for verse. It needed the science, it needed the history, it needed the backstory. Like, it was like, okay, do I have to restart every one of these poems by somehow working in my list of 14 allergies? And it didn't work. And so,
Yeah.
so I had started writing columns for the Washington Post magazine sometimes, just quietly stepping into the prose world. And I had a conversation with an agent where I said, I think I might try my hand at memoir. And I was just throwing out things about me, and I mentioned the food allergies. And he said, that's a story that somebody needs to tell. And he was right. There's all these books on the subject, but 99.9% of them are either cookbooks, like the nut-free, dairy-free, whatever, or kind of dense New York Times science columns. There needed to be something that went down the middle and had a sense of humor.
I was going to say it's very lighthearted. It's not. It could have been gloom, doom, drama. Don't eat this, don't eat that. Stay away from here, stay away from there. But it really is just about
Yeah.
navigating through life and having a good time.
Well, because it's my life. I don't want to write my life like it's gloom and doom. Sometimes people are like, "Well, how can you laugh?" And I'm like, "How can you not laugh?" I was at a friend's house on down on the floor playing with their 2-year-old, and they'd given her a sippy cup of milk just without even thinking of it. And every time she threw the cup down to the floor, milk would come glutting out of the top, and I would jump like she was throwing hand grenades. And it was kind of, at first I was a little irked, but then I thought, how funny is this? This 2-year-old is holding me hostage with a sippy cup. You have to laugh. It's the only way you can survive.
The name of the book is Don't Kill the Birthday Girl. Sandra Beasley, thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Barbara. It was a pleasure.
Have a great time at the fair.
Thanks.
Bye bye.